I remember it being really weird when I first moved to London, because obviously I grew up in Sheffield, you know, everybody talked like me. So when I moved to London, suddenly to be sort of almost like otherised, to be like, oh wow, you're this northerner, was, yeah, quite odd. But actually I feel like it's worked for me in a way. There aren't that many black northerners knocking around, so if anyone ever wants a black northerner, they come to me. Which, you know, I don't think it's necessarily a good thing. It does take people by surprise. Black culture kind of gets homogenised into sort of black Caribbean London when there are lots of other things going on. It's almost like to be black in this country is to be from London, and I feel like there are a lot more complicated identities here. Really, they don't get the kind of exposure that they should do. My black identity is something that I feel like I'm constantly sort of in the process of inventing. Being sort of part African American, and you know, I think just because America had a civil rights movement, the things that African Americans went through together, it made them a strong unit. And so to be African American really is something that's different from other forms of blackness. And my dad's from Brooklyn, he's from New York, and I noticed that like he'll have a way of being with me and my mom. And then when he's around other African Americans, it's like this secret little club that I'm not a part of. I call them brotherisms, and it's like, you know, it's like, hey brother, you know, it's this little kind of thing that's I'm not a part of, which is quite interesting. And that again makes me reassess what my kind of blackness is. And that is where this idea of the Afropean comes from. It's feeling European, but also something else. There's a great quote by Hanif Qureshi in a book called The Buddha of Suburbia. And he says, I was born and raised an Englishman, almost. You know, and I feel like that almost is what I try and explore. And that almost, even though it's a small thing, ultimately, you know, I am a Sheffielder and I am from Britain. I'll never be truly British though. And so with me, my identity is now all these things that are coming together to forge a complex identity. And ultimately, that is what we all are. We're all complex individuals, and so I think anytime you simplify something too much is a bad thing. So in a way, maybe kind of having this black identity that's not the typical black British identity has helped me understand just how complicated identity is. Yeah, being mixed race is an interesting one, man. Of course, you know, it makes you question identity. But you know, one of my friends, she's Swedish, blonde hair, blue eyes. We were speaking about this and I was saying, yeah, this identity and all that. And what was interesting is that she's from like generations of Nordic culture. You know, she's as white and as Scandinavian as you can possibly get. And she was saying that she has the exact same problems with issues of identity as me. And in a way I thought maybe it's just a human condition, and being mixed race has just allowed me to really explore the human condition where other people might not think about it too much. They might just be, well, I'm white and I'm an Englishman and that's that. And then guaranteed later on in their life they'll start to question things and think maybe I dumbed myself down a bit, or maybe I behaved in ways that didn't come from me. And I think ultimately they're just human things. You know, it's a strange experience. Living is a strange experience, and I think being mixed race has helped me look at life as the sort of the strange thing that it is. I was studying to be a physiotherapist, which when I look back, it's like, my God.
more about that?
I got into TV at quite a young age, 18, 19 really. And so at the time, I'm glad I didn't go to university at that age, because I would have gone down a path that wasn't my own really. It had been influences from my parents or whatever, or just doing something that even when I speak to the most sort of left-winged, socially conscious white person, there's a thing that they'll never understand, truly. And I find that puts up a barrier sometimes. I find that quite difficult. I don't think that white people understand what it's like to be black, to be part of a sort of a race that throughout history has been considered a sort of underclass, and that's been colonised and pillaged and enslaved. And then to know how that still affects the psychology of black people even today, you can never truly understand that unless you live it on a day-to-day basis. Being told constantly and it's through subtle ways that it's kind of hinted at that white people and cultures are superior to black cultures, that are just minute, and unless you're a part of it, unless it's like this kind of really subtle energy that you feel. Even in like little things like when there was troubles between Northern Ireland and England, you never hear about white on white crime. It was just crime, and race wasn't brought into it. But as soon as there's any kind of, if a kid in Hackney kills a kid in Harlesden or whatever, and then suddenly it's black on black crime. Whenever black people are involved in terrorism, the blackness is mentioned, whereas I feel like whiteness is invisible in a way that makes it really powerful. If I say a man in this country, in most countries, a man is a white man. You don't have to say white, but a black man is a black man, so there's that extra baggage. But I definitely think that there's a subtle power dynamic that even today, for instance, I work in TV, and when was the last time you saw two black presenters on TV? It's like you don't get that. I think that there is a difference between being a black male, black female, in terms of how we deal with colorism. All this kind of pseudoscience about black men being stronger. They might not be as intelligent, but they're strong. So I think what that means is that blackness in general is associated with strength, with athleticism, with masculinity. Because of that, and because masculinity is so tied in with being male, I think there's this ridiculous idea that to be black is masculine. Maybe the imagery that people have that dates back, I think, to slavery and to colonialism, the imagery that people have of black women, like the blacker the woman, the less feminine she is somehow. And so I think that that's where the tensions between lighter skinned black women and darker skinned black women probably come up. And I think we have to free ourselves from that, because I think it comes from, I don't think it comes from black people, even though it's a black problem, this colorism that we have to deal with. I think that really comes from white people and the way that historically white people have seen black people, and I think that's where the root of this kind of these issues with colorism stems from. But she's as white and as Scandinavian as you can possibly get. And she was saying that she has the exact same problems with issues of identity as me. And in a way I thought maybe it's just a human condition. Whiteness is invisible in a way that makes it really powerful.